Episode 1. The First Scream. The night was unusually still in Saint Agnes Convent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and refuses to leave. Sister Lucia lay on her cot, eyes closed, hands folded over her chest. She had been a nun for only a few months, quiet, obedient, and devout. But that night, something inside her stirred. A scream tore through the convent halls, a scream not in any language she knew, yet precise, terrifying, and archaic. Latin. Perfect Latin. The other sisters jolted awake, clutching crucifixes, eyes wide in disbelief. The sound seemed to echo endlessly, vibrating through the stone walls, rattling candle holders and sending rats scurrying from the shadows. Father Mateo, the elderly priest, burst into the dormitory, his candle shaking in his hand. "Lucia!" he called, but the scream did not stop. It surged from her lips like a river breaking its dam, phrases twisting into prayers none of them had ever heard. And then, as suddenly as it began, silence. Lucia sat up, trembling. Her breathing was ragged. She looked around, but the other sisters only stared at her with a mixture of fear and awe. She had no memory of screaming. She could barely understand the words that had left her mouth. I don't know," she whispered, voice shaking. Father Mateo placed a hand on her shoulder. His eyes were dark with concern. "Child, you spoke the words of the ancients, words that have not been uttered in centuries. Do you understand what this means?" She shook her head. I don't even know Latin," she murmured. Her lips were dry, her mind foggy, yet the memory of the sound, clear, terrifying, holy, haunted her. The nuns gathered in a circle, murmuring prayers. Some crossed themselves, others wept quietly. Rumors began to slip like shadows through the halls. A miracle, a curse, the work of God, or something far older, far darker. That night, Lucia could not sleep. Every corner of the convent seemed to pulse with a secret she could not name. She felt watched, not by people, but by something beyond the veil of human understanding. Candles flickered without wind, shadows shifted unnaturally, and in her heart, a whisper grew louder than any fear. "You are chosen, or condemned." By morning, the sisters dared not speak of the scream, yet the memory lingered like smoke. Father Mateo sent for ancient texts, hoping for guidance. But even the oldest scripture had no answer for words that were spoken without learning, prayers that came not from the mind, but from somewhere else. Lucia's life had changed in a single night. The convent, once a place of peace, had become a crucible of mystery, dread, and divine terror. And deep inside her, the knowledge that the screaming would return, and it would be louder, clearer, and far more dangerous, terrified her more than anything else she had ever known. The first scream had only just begun. Episode 2. The Hidden Scriptures. The dawn was gray and heavy over Saint Agnes Convent, the kind of morning where even sunlight seems reluctant to touch the earth. Sister Lucia had not slept. Her eyes, wide and haunted, traced the shadows of her room, where faint scratches and whispers lingered long after the night's screams. It began with a thud, soft, deliberate, like a book falling somewhere in the bowels of the convent. At first, Lucia thought it a dream, a trick of memory blending with terror. But the sound repeated. She followed it, her bare feet silent on cold stone, until she found herself in the forbidden library. The doors, usually locked tight, stood ajar, as if inviting her. Inside, dust motes floated in shafts of morning light. Rows of ancient tomes lined the walls, their leather covers cracked with age. And there, on the center table, lay a book she had never seen. Its cover was black, almost liquid in its sheen, engraved with letters she did not recognize, yet somehow understood. Lucia reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, a cold shiver ran up her arm. The book fell open, revealing pages that glowed faintly, words written in Latin. Not the classical Latin taught in schools, but something older, darker, and alive. The letters seemed to pulse, as if breathing. "Do you understand them?" whispered a voice behind her. It was Sister Beatrice, her face pale. "No one knows these texts. They are forbidden, dangerous." I think I do," Lucia murmured, though her voice trembled. As she read, the words slipped into her mind, filling her with knowledge she could not explain. Visions of saints and sinners, of angels weeping blood, of prayers they could summon and bind. She felt her heart race. yet an undeniable compulsion urged her to continue. The candles flickered, although there was no wind. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting toward her as if eager to listen. And then she heard it, a soft, chanting hum, almost imperceptible, rising from the floorboards beneath her feet. It spoke in the same Latin she had screamed the night before, forming words that promised power and warned of consequences. Sister Beatrice recoiled. "Lucia, this is not the work of God. It is something else." Lucia's lips moved without her volition, whispering prayers she did not consciously know. Her eyes fluttered shut, and she fell to the floor, body trembling, visions flooding her mind, a cathedral of shadows, a choir of unseen voices, and herself at the center of it all. She understood, suddenly, that her screams were no accident. They were a bridge, and the bridge was opening wider each night. When she finally awoke, hours later, the book had vanished. The library was as it always was, dust-covered and silent, leaving only the echo of its presence in her mind. Yet something had changed. She could feel it in her blood. The screaming would return, and the words, ancient, forbidden, alive, were waiting. Outside, the convent seemed normal again, but Lucia knew better. The hidden scriptures had chosen her, and the choice was not hers to make. The night, she realized, was only the beginning. Episode 3, The Silent Confessions. Night descended on Saint Agnes Convent like a velvet shroud, thick and suffocating. The air was heavy with the scent of candle wax, old wood, and something faintly metallic, blood perhaps, or memory of blood long dried into the stones. Sister Lucia lay awake, heart hammering, her mind replaying the screams and visions of the forbidden scriptures. But this night would be different. The confessional at the far end of the chapel door creaked open on its own. No footsteps, no whispers, just the slow, deliberate swing of wood against stone. Lucia felt a pull she could not resist. Her bare feet carried her silently across the cold floor, each step echoing like a warning. Inside the confessional, a voice spoke, not in words she understood, but in Latin. A confessional, she realized, without a priest. And the voice was not hers. It murmured sins, dark, intimate secrets, spoken as if by the souls of those long dead. The words scratched at her mind, tugged at her conscience, and made her scream silently behind her lips. Sister Beatrice appeared outside the confessional, eyes wide with fear. "Lucia, no one should hear this," she whispered, clutching her rosary. "The souls, they are trapped. They are confessing through you." Lucia's lips moved, despite herself. The Latin flowed effortlessly, sentences forming that she had never learned. She felt the presence of hundreds of voices pressing against her, their confessions a tide of guilt, shame, and terror. She realized with horror that each confession bound her closer to whatever force had chosen her. In the shadows, candles flickered wildly. The walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with the confessions, the stone itself breathing in and out. The air became thick, almost solid, and Lucia felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her chest. The dead were reaching through her, speaking their truths, and she was the unwilling scribe. Sister Beatrice's voice broke through. "You must stop. They will consume you if you continue." But Lucia could not, even if she wanted to. The words had a life of their own. Her body trembled, tears streaming down her face. Yet her mind was clear. The confessions had a purpose, though she could not yet see it. Then a new voice spoke, low and commanding, beneath the chorus of the dead. "Do not fear, chosen one. We guide you. We awaken you." The words sent shivers crawling down Lucia's spine. She realized, with a mix of awe and terror, that the confessional was no longer a place for the living. It had become a conduit, a bridge between the convent and something far older, far darker than anything she had imagined. By dawn, the confessional was silent. Sister Lucia, drained and trembling, stumbled back to her cot. The voices lingered in her mind, echoing with a weight that refused to fade. And in the quiet, she understood a truth more terrifying than the confessions themselves. Her screams, her sleep, her very being were now inseparable from the dead. The convent would never be the same, and neither would she. Episode 4. The Mark of Ashes. The dawn light fell weakly through the stained glass windows of Saint Agnes Convent, but it did little to pierce the shadows that clung to Sister Lucia. She had barely slept. Every corner of the dormitory seemed alive, whispering in the same Latin she had screamed in the nights before. It started subtly, a smudge on her forehead, black and fine as soot. She touched it and recoiled. It burned lightly, almost imperceptibly, yet deep enough to make her shiver. She looked into the cracked mirror above her cot, and her own reflection seemed wrong. The mark pulsed, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Sister Beatrice, who had become both guardian and witness, gasped when she saw it. "Lucia, what is that?" she whispered, clutching her rosary like it might shield her from seeing more than she should. I don't know," Lucia murmured, tracing the black streak with trembling fingers. But she did know, in a way that terrified her. The mark was not just on her skin, it was in her blood, etched into her very soul. By mid-morning, the nuns began noticing strange occurrences. Candles snuffed themselves out, shadows gathered unnaturally in corners, whispers slithered through the hallways. Those who passed near Lucia flinched, feeling a weight pressing on their chests. The mark, it seemed, radiated something beyond human understanding. That night, she dreamed again. Latin chants wrapped around her like chains, pulling her through visions of fire and ash, angels weeping tears of blood, and a cathedral where the walls were stitched with the sins of the living and the dead. In the center, a dark figure pointed at her, silent, yet its presence spoke louder than words. Lucia awoke in a cold sweat, the mark throbbing on her forehead. It had spread slightly, branching into intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost alive. She realized with horror that this was not a curse in the simple sense. It was a call. Something or someone was marking her, preparing her for what was coming. Father Matteo noticed the change immediately. "It is no ordinary blemish," he said gravely, examining her with eyes heavy with dread. "It is a seal, a sign of something ancient and powerful. Whatever is coming, it has chosen you." Lucia felt the weight of his words, but more importantly, she felt the truth in her bones, her screams, her forbidden knowledge, the confessional confessions. They had all led to this. The mark was both a warning and an invitation, a bridge to a force she did not yet understand, yet could not resist. By midnight, the convent was silent, save for the faintest whisper of Latin carried on the cold wind. Lucia touched the mark again. It pulsed beneath her fingers like a heartbeat of darkness. And somewhere, deep in the stone corridors of the convent, something stirred in response. The night had only begun, and so had the torment. Episode 5, The Angel's Warning. The convent had never felt colder. Even the candles seemed to hesitate, their flames quivering as though afraid to light the shadows that clung to the stone walls. Sister Lucia sat in her cell, hands clasped, staring at the black mark on her forehead. It pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of something ancient, a presence she could feel but not name. Then, a sound unlike any other reached her ears, a soft, rhythmic thrum echoing through the stone corridors. She looked up and froze. There, in the corner of her cell, a figure materialized, luminous yet shadowed, beautiful yet terrifying. Wings stretched impossibly high, feathers black as night edged in silver light. An angel, or something that wore the guise of one. Lucia's lips parted, but no words came. The figure spoke, its voice melodic and chilling, words in Latin rolling from its lips like a prophecy. "You are chosen, child of the screams. A veil is lifting. The convent is on the edge. Prepare, or all will fall." Fear and awe knotted in her chest. She had heard voices before, whispered confessions of the dead, Latin prayers she had never learned. But this was different. This being did not ask for understanding. It commanded attention, demanding obedience to a fate she could neither see nor resist. Father Matteo appeared at the doorway, drawn by the glow. His eyes widened, recognizing the figure even as he could not name it. "Lucia, do not falter," he urged, clutching his crucifix, though even he trembled. "The Lord or the devil, heaven or hell, it is not for us to judge, but heed the warning." The angel stepped closer, wings folding like shadows around her. "A ritual is needed," it intoned. "The screams are the key. The scriptures guide the path. Fail, and the darkness shall consume all under this roof." Sister Lucia felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her soul. She wanted to flee, to hide under the blankets of her simple cot. But the mark burned hotter at the thought. She realized with a shiver of dread that the angel did not merely warn, she was bound to act. The screams, the confessions, the mark, they were all part of a design she could not escape. The figure lingered for only a moment, wings folding into the darkness. Then it vanished, leaving behind a whisper of air scented with ash and ozone, and a chill that seemed to seep into every corner of her bones. Father Mateo placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but trembling. "Lucia, whatever is coming, it is already here. The convent will not survive unprepared. You must lead them, or none will." That night she could not close her eyes. The walls seemed to hum with anticipation, the shadows stretched long and restless, and the Latin prayers she had screamed before now whispered insistently in her ears. The angel's warning was clear. The line between salvation and destruction was thin, and she alone stood in the middle of it. Outside, the moonlight fell cold and unforgiving. Inside, the convent waited, and Lucia, marked, chosen, terrified, felt the first stirrings of the fate that had been written for her in the language of the dead. The night was far from over. Episode 6, The Blood Psalms. The night had a taste, metallic, bitter, as if the air itself had bled. Saint Agnes Convent lay in uneasy silence, shadows crawling along the stone walls like living things. Sister Lucia knelt before the altar, her fingers brushing against the cold wood, eyes fixed on the mark pulsing on her forehead. It throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a sinister rhythm that seemed to command the world around her. Then she saw it. At first it was just a smear, dark red, glistening under the flicker of candlelight. But as she leaned closer, the blood-formed letters, Latin words, phrases that twisted and writhed across the altar as if alive, readable only by her. She gasped. The same prayers she had screamed in the dead of night now scrawled themselves in blood, forming psalms that spoke of sins, salvation, and sacrifice. Father Mateo entered, drawn by the faint light and the whisper of movement. His eyes widened as he took in the altar. "By God, the blood psalms," he whispered, voice trembling. "They have chosen you to read them, to interpret their will." Sister Lucia's hands shook as she traced the letters. The words seared themselves into her mind, visions accompanying each phrase, nuns kneeling in terror, shadows writhing across sacred walls, a choir of unseen voices singing in perfect, horrifying harmony. She felt the psalms penetrate her very soul, awakening something she could neither understand nor resist. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing all but a single candle. The shadows grew dense, solid almost, pressing in on her. The Latin words whispered, not in her mind, but aloud, soft, melodious, and dripping with menace. "You are the vessel," they intoned, "the bridge, the chosen one." Father Mateo's voice broke through her trance. "Lucia, control it. Whatever this is, it is not mercy, it is testing you." But his words felt fragile against the weight of the altar's secret, as if they would shatter in the presence of the psalms. Sister Lucia's eyes filled with tears, yet she continued to read. With every syllable the air thickened, shadows twisting, and the church seemed to breathe. Her scream, the forbidden scriptures, the confessions, they had all led to this moment. She realized the psalms were not just warnings, they were instructions, commands, a ritual she was compelled to perform. The final words formed, and the candle flared, illuminating the entire chapel in a ghastly red glow. Lucia felt herself trembling, yet alive with an unearthly clarity. Somewhere, deep in the stone of the convent, the presence that had haunted her stirred, acknowledging her obedience, marking the next phase of what was coming. Father Mateo crossed himself, his voice hoarse. "God help us. She bears the burden of centuries." Sister Lucia knelt, palms pressed to the blood-stained altar. She whispered the last line aloud, her voice merging with the Latin echoes that filled the chapel. And in that moment, she understood a terrifying truth. The psalms were not for the living. They were for her, and through her, for something far older than humanity itself. The night had deepened, and in the darkness, the convent waited, as did the forces she had now irrevocably awoken. Episode 7, The Choir of Shadows. Night fell over Saint Agnes Convent like a shroud stitched from the coldest obsidian. Sister Lucia lay in her cot, the black mark on her forehead throbbing with a pulse that mirrored the sinister rhythm of her heartbeat. Her eyes were open, yet she felt herself already somewhere else, pulled into a place she could not see but could feel in every fiber of her being. It began as a whisper, barely audible, curling through the hallways like smoke. Then it grew, a choir, not of the living, but of shadows. Invisible mouths sang in perfect Latin, repeating the prayers, the screams, and the confessions that had haunted Lucia since her first night at the convent. The sound was beautiful, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. She rose, trembling, drawn toward the chapel. Each step echoed unnaturally, as if the stones themselves were speaking. Shadows twisted around her feet, elongating, writhing, moving with a consciousness that made her skin crawl. The choir's voices intensified, layering upon one another in a harmonic terror that pressed against her mind. Father Mateo appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. "Lucia, don't go. It's not a dream. It's not alive, but it is. It will consume you if it reaches your mind fully." But she could not stop. Her legs moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the altar, toward the origin of the sound. As she stepped into the chapel, the shadows coalesced, forming indistinct figures that mirrored the nuns and priests of the past centuries, frozen in acts of prayer, confession, and sin. Their mouths opened in unison, chanting the Latin of her screams. Lucia fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, as the voices twisted into words she could understand. "You are the bridge, the veil is thin, lead us, or all will drown in darkness." The choir's song was no longer a sound, it was a command, a force that pressed on her soul, shaping her very thoughts. Father Mateo knelt beside her, voice trembling. "Child, we must anchor you. Prayers, holy water, anything to hold you back." But even he could not reach the center of the storm. The choir enveloped her, and for a moment the world dissolved into shadows, Latin, and fire that burned without consuming. Lucia opened her mouth and the song shifted. Her scream, her prayers, merged with the choir, creating a sound that was hers and not hers. Commanding yet pleading, the shadows faltered, pausing, recognizing her authority, even as fear clutched her heart. She was no longer just the vessel. She was the conductor of something ancient, something that had waited centuries for a voice capable of guiding it. The candlelight danced violently, throwing the shadows into grotesque forms that reached toward her, yet she did not flinch. She had seen too much, known too much, to cower now. The choir's song began to ebb, leaving only the echo of her own voice and the soft pulse of the mark on her forehead. Father Mateo exhaled shakily. "God save us, she is no longer merely the chosen. She is their master, or their prisoner." Lucia sank to the cold stone floor, the black mark throbbing, the Latin echoing faintly in her mind. The choir of shadows had sung her truth. She was the bridge, and what lay beyond that bridge would demand a price far greater than any she had yet imagined. The night had deepened, and in the silence the convent waited. Episode 8. The Confessional of Silence. The convent was swallowed by darkness that night, a thick, suffocating black that seemed to seep into the stone itself. Sister Lucia could feel it pressing against her, whispering in the edges of her mind. And then she saw it, a confessional that had never been there before. The wood was aged, blackened, and etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the candlelight. Its doors were shut, yet a low hum emanated from within, vibrating through the floorboards. Something about it called to her, irresistible and terrifying all at once. She knew, deep in her soul, that the confessional was no ordinary place. Sister Beatrice appeared behind her, eyes wide with fear. "Lucia, do not. Whatever waits inside, it is not of this world. The confessional, it chooses its own. You must not answer its call." But Lucia's feet moved of their own accord, carrying her closer. The door creaked open before her, revealing darkness inside that seemed to breathe, inhale and exhale like a living thing. She stepped in, heart hammering, and immediately felt the presence of countless voices pressing against her mind. They whispered sins, confessions not of the living, but of the dead. Murmurs of betrayal, lust, greed, and violence spilled into her consciousness. They clawed at her, seeking release, seeking voice, and she realized with a shiver of terror that the confessional was a conduit. Through her, The dead spoke, their confessions shaping the reality of the convent itself. Her lips moved, whispering words in Latin that she had never consciously learned, each syllable both terrifying and necessary. Shadows gathered, stretching along the walls, forming faces that twisted with longing and despair. The confessional's wood creaked as if straining to contain the weight of the spirits within. Father Mateo's voice trembled from the doorway. "Lucia, you cannot hold them. They will consume you." But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The confessional had claimed her. She was not merely a witness. She had become the vessel, the bridge, the living recorder of their secrets. Images flashed behind her eyelids, nuns kneeling in fear, angels weeping tears of fire, the mark on her forehead glowing brighter than ever. She felt herself pulled down into the darkness of the confessional, not physically, but in a way that touched her mind, her soul. Time bent and warped, the voices layering upon one another in a cacophony of pain and revelation. When she finally stumbled back into the chapel, gasping for air, the confessional had vanished. Only the faint echo of whispers lingered, and the cold pulse of the black mark reminded her that the night's ordeal was far from over. Father Mateo helped her to a pew, his eyes haunted. The confessional chooses its own, and tonight it chose you. It will call again, and next time, I fear the cost will be more than any of us can bear. Sister Lucia pressed her hands to the mark on her forehead, feeling its pulse echo in her veins. She understood now. The confessional was not just a place. It was a test, a bridge, and a warning. And she, marked, chosen, terrified, was at the center of something far older and far darker than Saint Agnes itself. The convent waited, and in the shadows the whispers lingered, promising that the silence would never return. Episode 9. The convent's shadow over the town. The morning sun struggled through thick clouds, casting a gray pall over the town surrounding Saint Agnes Convent. But the townspeople sensed something had shifted. Animals hid in their pens, dogs whimpered at empty corners, and a chill clung to the streets despite the warmth of early spring. Whispers spread, of unnatural lights at the convent, of shadows moving without source, of screams echoing in the dead of night. Inside the convent, Sister Lucia felt it most keenly. The black mark on her forehead pulsed with a warning, and the echoes of the choir of shadows from the previous nights lingered in her mind. Every breath she took seemed heavy, laden with unseen eyes, watching, judging, waiting. Father Mateo rushed to her side. "Lucia, the townspeople, they feel it too. The veil isn't contained within these walls anymore." Lucia nodded, gripping the edge of her cot. She could sense the extension of the darkness beyond the convent gates. The confessional, the blood psalms, the choir. They had all been warning her of something escalating, and now it was no longer just the convent at risk. By midday, the first incidents occurred. A woman walking past the convent swore she saw shadows bending unnaturally along the walls. A child claimed that the statues of saints were whispering his name in Latin. Windows rattled, doors slammed, and a low hum filled the town, growing louder with each passing hour. The Latin chants from the convent's corridors now echoed faintly into the streets, carried on an invisible wind. Sister Beatrice entered Lucia's cell, pale and trembling. "The dead, they're no longer contained. And whatever you're connected to, it's bleeding into the world outside. People are frightened, and worse, some are drawn to it." Lucia's voice was soft but firm. "I can feel them, the ones beyond the walls. They want release. They want their confessions heard. But I cannot stop it." "Not entirely. And if I fail, the darkness will spread." Father Mateo knelt beside her, eyes haunted. "We need to act. Lucia, whatever is being unleashed, it will not spare the innocent. Your screams, the psalms, you are the key. But the key may not be enough this time." As dusk fell, the town was caught between fear and fascination. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the streets, whispering names, revealing sins long buried. Windows glowed with eerie light from the convent, and at the very center, Sister Lucia stood at the altar, the mark on her forehead throbbing in tandem with the sinister rhythm of the Latin that now surged around her. She raised her hands, chanting softly, feeling the extension of her power and its consequences. The choir of shadows responded, voices layering across the town, reaching hearts and minds alike. Some fled in terror, Others were inexplicably drawn toward the convent, compelled by the unseen force Lucia now partially commanded. Father Mateo watched helplessly, whispering prayers under his breath. God forgive us. We are no longer the watchers. We are witnesses to something older, something that moves through her and through the world itself. Lucia's eyes opened wide, reflecting the dark brilliance of the shadows gathering within her. She understood one undeniable truth. The convent was no longer just a sanctuary. It was the epicenter of a power that could ripple through the town, through the world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night was coming, and with it, the consequences of the bridge she had become. Episode 10, The Town Under the Veil. Night fell like a black curtain over the town surrounding Saint Agnes Convent. The streets deserted, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. Lanterns flickered, their light distorted by shadows that seemed to crawl of their own accord. Somewhere, a church bell rang, though the tower was empty, and at the heart of it all, the convent pulsed with a dark rhythm only Sister Lucia could feel. She stood at the altar, the black mark on her forehead throbbing in sync with the surge of power around her. The choir of shadows had returned, louder, more insistent, their Latin chants wrapped around the town like chains, seeping into homes, spilling into the minds of the unsuspecting. She could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every hidden sin. The town was alive with it, and she was the conduit. Father Mateo approached cautiously, clutching a crucifix that trembled in his hand. Lucia, the veil between worlds, it's thinning. They are not just whispers anymore. They're here, they're watching, and they hunger. Lucia swallowed hard, feeling the force pressing into her very bones. I can sense them. The dead, the lost. They want to confess, to be heard. But the more I channel, the more they push. I'm not sure I can control it. In the streets below, phenomena escalated. Windows shattered without cause. Shadows stretched unnaturally across cobblestones, forming shapes that mimicked townsfolk, yet moved with impossible fluidity. Children screamed at invisible figures, and animals howled into the night. The Latin chants from the convent pulsed in harmony with these disturbances, tethered to Lucia's every breath. Sister Beatrice appeared at the doorway, eyes wide with fear. Lucia, you have to stop. You are letting them through. The psalms, the confessions, they are too strong. But it was too late. The energy surged through her, pulling her into a trance. Her voice joined the choir, singing prayers she had never learned and cries that were both hers and not hers. Light and shadow intertwined in the chapel, rising and twisting, a storm contained within stone walls. Father Mateo's voice broke through her consciousness. Lucia, remember who you are. You are the bridge. Yes, but you are still human. Do not let them take you completely. Her eyes snapped open, glowing faintly in the candlelight. The mark throbbed violently, and for the first time, she understood the full magnitude of her power. The town outside was under the veil she controlled, teetering on the edge between the living and the dead. Every secret, every hidden guilt, every whispered confession fed the shadows. But it was her will that could either guide them or destroy everything. The choir quieted suddenly, as if waiting for her decision. Breathless and trembling, Lucia realized the truth. She was no longer merely a vessel. She was the architect of the veil itself. One misstep, one falter, and the town, the convent, and perhaps even the world would pay the price. She lowered her hands slowly, whispering the final line of the Latin psalm, and the shadows held their breath. Outside, the town waited, suspended between fear and the unknown. Inside, Lucia felt the weight of centuries on her shoulders, and the night was far from over. Episode 11, The Ancient Spirit. A deep silence settled over Saint Agnes Convent that night, heavier than any shadow. Even the choir of shadows held its breath, as though aware that something far older than their whispers had awakened. Sister Lucia knelt at the altar, the black mark throbbing fiercely, its pulse almost synchronized with her own. Something was coming, something that had waited centuries for a soul like hers. Then the air shifted. The temperature plummeted, frost forming along the edges of the windows. Candles flickered violently, their flames bending toward a presence she could not yet see. And from the far corner of the chapel, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in darkness that seemed alive, yet its form flickered with faint, golden light. An ancient spirit, older than the convent itself, exuding power and judgment in equal measure. Lucia's breath caught. The choir of shadows had fallen silent. Even Father Mateo, standing behind her with hands clasped in prayer, faltered at the sight. "By God, it's the Primordial One," he whispered. "It is older than saints, older than prayers, and it has come for you." The spirit's voice echoed in the chapel, deep and resonant, speaking in Latin older than any scripture Lucia had ever read. "Child of the screams, chosen of centuries, you wield a power you cannot yet comprehend. The veil grows thin, and the world trembles. Will you command it, or will it consume you?" Her heart pounded, the black mark burning against her forehead. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet she could not move. She felt every hidden sin, every whispered confession, every shadow of the past pressing upon her mind. And in that crushing weight, a clarity emerged. The Primordial One was not merely a threat, it was a test. Father Mateo stepped closer, voice strained. "Lucia, do not falter. Speak the Psalms, bind the shadows, or..." His words faltered as the spirit's gaze swept over him, freezing him in place with an unseen force. Lucia rose slowly, hands trembling. Her voice broke the silence, chanting in Latin, syllables flowing from her lips with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The choir of shadows rose to join her, their voices weaving around the ancient spirit, their power intertwining with hers. The figure pulsed, shadows and light colliding violently as it tested her, probing her resolve. Pain seared through her body, visions of the dead and the living blending, yet she refused to break. The mark burned brighter, connecting her to every secret, every confession, every hidden truth. She realized she was no longer a vessel. She was a conductor, shaping the chaos, facing a power that could erase her existence with a thought. With one final cry in Latin, the Primordial One recoiled. Its golden dark aura wavered, and the chapel fell silent once more. The choir of shadows whispered their approval, surrounding her with a warmth she had not felt since the beginning of her ordeal. Father Mateo sank to the floor, exhausted. "God, she has endured. She has survived." Lucia's hands fell to her sides, the black mark still pulsing, but steadier now. She had faced the ancient spirit, survived its judgment, and yet she knew the trial was far from over. The veil had thinned, the town had witnessed, and the forces beyond comprehension were now awake. The night had deepened, and the world outside Saint Agnes Convent had changed forever. Episode 12, The Night of Reckoning. The town trembled under a sky heavy with unnatural darkness. Saint Agnes Convent loomed at the center, its spires casting long, twisting shadows over the streets. The wind carried whispers of Latin prayers, the echoes of confessions, and the shrill notes of the choir of shadows. Every heartbeat in the town seemed to synchronize with the pulse of the black mark on Sister Lucia's forehead. Inside the chapel, Lucia stood alone, her hands raised, chanting the blood psalms. The mark burned like molten coal, connecting her to the dead, the lost, and the unseen forces pressing against reality. She could feel the entire town suspended between worlds, held in balance by her will alone. Every sin, every hidden desire, every unspoken truth amplified the energy that flowed through her. Father Mateo appeared at the doorway, exhausted, fear etched into every line of his face. "Lucia, the veil, it cannot hold forever. The town, they are vulnerable. You must do this, or..." His words faltered under the weight of what was happening. Suddenly, shadows burst from the streets, forming grotesque shapes, writhing and clawing at the air. Windows shattered, lanterns exploded into sparks. The choir of shadows rose, their voices merging with Lucia's, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. From the center of the storm, the Primordial One appeared again, larger, more intense, its aura bending light and dark into impossible forms. It spoke in a voice older than time. "Child of the screams, you cannot contain them all. One falter, one hesitation, and all will fall into oblivion." Lucia's chest heaved, but she did not waver. She realized then that she had become the bridge, the shield, and the conductor. Her screams, her prayers, her mark, they were no longer passive. They were weapons, tools, and keys. She stepped forward, chanting louder, her voice slicing through the chaos, binding the shadows, calling the spirits to obey her command. The Primordial One recoiled slightly, testing her resolve, pushing against her power, attempting to overwhelm her. Pain seared through her, visions of the dead and living flooding her mind. But she held firm, feeling every syllable of Latin fuse with her soul, every echo of the choir bending to her will. Outside, the town quaked, yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadows began to retract. Windows stopped rattling. The unnatural wind fell silent. The whispers faded. The dead, the lost, the unseen. They paused, acknowledging her authority. Father Mateo collapsed to the floor, tears streaming. She has done it. She survived and controlled it. Lucia's knees hit the stone floor, her hands pressed to the pulsing mark. She was trembling, exhausted, yet victorious. The veil had held. The town, though shaken, had been spared. And though the Primordial One remained, watching, patient, eternal, she had proven she was no mere vessel. She was the force that bridged worlds. The night receded slowly, the shadows pulling back into the corners, leaving the town eerily quiet. But Lucia knew the cost. She had wielded power no human was meant to touch, and the mark, still throbbing, reminded her that the balance she had preserved was fragile, temporary, and ever watchful. The convent stood silent, awaiting dawn, and the girl who screamed in Latin while asleep, now awakened, knew that the night of reckoning was only the beginning. Episode 13, The Price of Power. The dawn broke over Saint Agnes Convent with a false calm. The town seemed untouched at first glance, yet an uneasy tension clung to every street, every home. Whispers of what had transpired during the night of reckoning had begun to spread, and some townspeople woke with fragmented memories, flashes of shadows, and faint, chilling Latin phrases echoing in their minds. Inside the convent, Sister Lucia knelt in the chapel, hands pressed to the black mark that throbbed steadily, still pulsing with the immense energy she had wielded. But the victory of the previous night weighed heavily. Every confession she had heard, every shadow she had controlled demanded a cost. She could feel it clawing at her from within, a toll that no human should bear. Father Mateo entered silently, his face pale and drawn. Lucia, there are consequences. The dead you channeled, some are restless. Not all are content to remain bound. And the living, their fears, their secrets, they linger, twisting. Lucia's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. I did what I had to do. I saved them. I saved the town. But even as she spoke, she could feel the shadows at her feet, the whispers in the walls. Power, she realized, was never free. It demanded obedience, sacrifices, and a soul willing to bend without breaking. The chapel trembled suddenly, the candles flickering violently. A low, resonant voice spoke, not the Primordial One, but something smaller, insidious. A spirit born from the accumulation of sins, neither dead nor alive, yet tethered to her through the mark. You have used the power, but power must be repaid. It hissed, its form coalescing from smoke and shadow. Eyes like embers. Will you give, or will the debt take itself? Lucia's hands tightened against the altar, nails digging into the wood. She had the choice: surrender a part of herself to balance the scales, or allow the debt to manifest through the town, the innocent, the living. Pain, fear, and an almost unbearable fatigue washed over her. She was still a child, yet burdened with the judgment of centuries. Father Mateo moved to her side, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. Child, you have seen too much, done too much, but you are still human. Choose wisely. Lucia closed her eyes, taking a trembling breath. The shadows coiled tighter, whispering threats and secrets, demanding release. Her mind reeled, but clarity emerged from the chaos. She would pay, yes, but she would decide how. With a whispered Latin prayer, she offered a fragment of her own essence, her memories, her fear, and part of her soul to the debt. The shadow shrieked, a sound that rattled stone and bone, then dissipated, leaving silence behind. The mark pulsed slower now, steadier, as if acknowledging her decision. The debt had been paid, at least for now, but the cost had etched itself into her being. Father Mateo exhaled shakily. You bore the burden and survived. Lucia opened her eyes, weary, trembling, but resolute. The town was safe, yet she understood. The price of power was never truly paid. It was a chain, each link heavier than the last, and she alone bore it. The convent stood in the fragile light of dawn, shadows receding but never gone. And in the heart of the chapel, the girl who screamed in Latin while asleep understood something terrifying and irrevocable. She was no longer merely chosen. She was indebted, eternally. The night had passed, but the cost remained. Episode 14, The Night of Shadows. Darkness fell over the town like a living thing, thick and suffocating. The streets of Saint Agnes were deserted, yet shadows writhed along the cobblestones, stretching unnaturally, bending around corners as if searching for something or someone. Sister Lucia stood at the convent's highest tower, the black mark pulsing fiercely, a heartbeat against the night. She had felt it coming, the culmination of everything, the choir of shadows, the confessional, the primordial one, and the countless spirits she had bound. Father Mateo appeared beside her, clutching a crucifix that trembled in his hands. "Lucia, they are everywhere now. The veil has thinned completely. Tonight the town itself will scream in Latin, whether it wants to or not." Lucia's eyes glimmered with a mix of fear and determination. "I know. I can feel them. The dead, the restless, the living. They all converge tonight. I have to hold the veil, or—" Her voice faltered, swallowed by the wind that carried the faint, dissonant notes of the choir. The first screams began in the town below, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of horror. Windows rattled, doors burst open, and shadows leapt from walls, twisting into grotesque forms that clawed at the air. The living ran in terror, yet many were drawn to the convent, compelled by the pull of the Latin that poured from the chapel. Lucia's hands rose, chanting the psalms she had learned in nights of terror and revelation. The black mark glowed brighter than ever, sending pulses of energy outward, intertwining with every shadow, every whisper, every scream. The choir of shadows swelled, their voices joining hers in a terrifying, perfect harmony. Suddenly, the Primordial One appeared, massive and radiant dark, its presence bending light and shadow around it. "Child of screams, you will falter. The debt, the power, they will consume you." Lucia's breath caught, the weight of centuries pressing on her. She could feel the souls of the dead, the secrets of the living, all converging in one horrifying, endless tide. Pain and exhaustion threatened to break her, but she clenched her teeth, letting the Latin flow from her lips, pure and unyielding. Her scream merged with the choir, commanding, binding, and shaping the chaos. Father Mateo shouted prayers, moving among the shadows as best he could, but the power emanating from Lucia was beyond comprehension. The veil wavered, threatening to tear, yet she held firm, her very soul intertwined with every pulse, every echo, every shadow. Then, in one overwhelming crescendo, the chaos froze. Shadows halted mid-air, windows stopped shattering, the wind stilled. The Latin faded into a low, harmonious hum that resonated in every heart, living and dead alike. Lucia fell to her knees, trembling, sweat and tears streaking her face. The mark still pulsed, but steadier now, as if acknowledging her triumph. Father Mateo knelt beside her, voice hoarse. She held the night. She kept the veil intact. By God, she has done what no human could. Lucia pressed her hands to the altar, breath ragged, and understood the terrible truth. The night had passed, but the power, the debt, and the vigilance required of her were eternal. The town was safe, for now, but the shadows waited, patient, and the veil would always thin again. And somewhere, deep in the darkness beyond the convent, the Primordial One watched, waiting for the moment when the balance would falter once more. Episode 15, Eternal Vigil. The first light of dawn barely pierced the heavy fog that clung to Saint Agnes. The town was quiet, but the silence was uneasy, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. Inside the convent, the chapel stood untouched by time, but it bore the weight of 100 nights of screams, Latin chants, and shadows that refused to fade. Sister Lucia knelt before the altar, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The black mark on her forehead throbbed like a heartbeat, now permanent. A silent drum reminding her of the power she had wielded and the debt she would forever carry. She was no longer merely a conduit. She was the bridge, the guardian, and the prisoner of forces beyond mortal comprehension. Father Mateo entered quietly, his eyes weary but filled with awe. "Lucia, the veil is stable for now. You have done what none of us could imagine. You've held the dead, the shadows, the primordial, all at once." Lucia lifted her gaze, eyes reflecting exhaustion, sorrow, and a strange determination. "It's not over, Father. The veil, it will thin again. The shadows will rise again, and the primordial, it waits, always." Her voice was steady despite the weight pressing down on her soul. The chapel trembled suddenly, a subtle quiver of energy beneath the stone floor. It was a reminder, a whisper from the unseen. Vigilance was eternal. The choir of shadows hovered around her, silent, obedient, yet expectant. They were not free, and neither was she. The power that had saved the town now bound her to an unending watch. Outside, the town awoke cautiously. Windows opened to pale, fearful faces. People whispered of dreams they couldn't remember, of voices chanting Latin in the night, of shadows that had recoiled just enough to spare them. They sensed the debt paid, but none could know the true cost. Lucia rose from the altar, her hands pressed to the mark. It pulsed steadily now, not with chaos, but with a steady rhythm, the beat of her eternal vigil. She understood that her life would be a balance of prayer, fear, and unwavering watchfulness. Her screams in Latin, once unbidden in sleep, would now be her tool, her shield, her curse. Father Mateo stepped close. "Child, you bear the burden alone. But you've given them life. You've kept the world from tipping into darkness." Lucia nodded, eyes scanning the silent chapel, the empty pews, the flickering candlelight. "I will watch," she whispered. "I will scream, I will pray, and I will hold the veil forever, if I must." From the shadows, the Primordial One observed, patient, unyielding, its golden dark aura pulsing in acknowledgement. It would wait. But it knew now that Lucia's resolve was unbreakable. The veil was safe, yet the echoes of the night, the screams, the Latin, the choir would resonate through eternity. The convent settled into uneasy calm, the wind carrying faint whispers of the past and the unspoken promise of the future. And in the heart of the chapel, the girl who screamed in Latin while asleep embraced her fate, eternal and unyielding, guardian, bridge, and sentinel of a world forever balanced between the living and the dead. The night had ended, but the vigil was eternal.
Epilogue: Whispers Beyond the Veil. Months passed. Yet Saint Agnes Convent remained a place of quiet vigilance. The town had resumed its routines. Children played in the streets, and merchants reopened their shops. But an invisible tension lingered. Like the faint hum of a choir no one could see. People spoke in hushed tones of strange dreams, of Latin chants, of shadows twisting in impossible forms, of a girl whose cries once bridged the living and the dead. Inside the convent, Sister Lucia moved among the halls silently. The black mark on her forehead had not faded, it pulsed faintly. A constant reminder of the debt she bore and the power she commanded. She no longer slept as others did. When she closed her eyes, the Latin came unbidden. Voices of the choir of shadows whispering, guiding, and warning. Father Mateo watched her from a distance, his eyes heavy with both awe and sorrow. "She carries the world on her shoulders," he murmured. "And yet, she endures." Lucia paused before the altar, her fingers tracing the worn stone. She could feel the veil, the thin line between life and death, stretching, bending, and quivering beyond the convent walls. Every sin, every secret, every whispered prayer in the town fed the shadows. And she, bound by her own courage and fear, remained their eternal sentinel. A faint wind stirred, carrying with it whispers from the darkness beyond. The Primordial One observed, patient and eternal, knowing that the balance had been preserved, but only by her unwavering will. The night might rise again. The shadows might press harder. The dead might speak louder, but Lucia would be ready. Always. She knelt, eyes closed, and chanted softly in Latin. The voices of the choir answered, wrapping the convent in a web of power and protection. She was no longer just the girl who screamed while asleep. She was the guardian, the bridge, and the eternal voice that kept the darkness at bay. Outside, The town thrived under the fragile calm. Yet somewhere in the shadows, the whispers continued, faint but persistent, a reminder that the veil never truly rests. And in the heart of Saint Agnes Convent, the girl who had screamed in Latin now listened, watched, and waited, forever vigilant, forever bound, forever alive in the space between the living and the dead. The world had been spared, for now.